Michelle and Lisa Taylor, flanked by their family, free to go home, their conviction quashed. Freed by the Court of Appeal just 1 year after being found guilty of the brutal murder of Alison Shaughnessy.
It was the perfect tabloid story. Sex, love, the kiss, the Judas kiss it was called. Attractive young people, it had everything and ended in murder.
I think it was a woman attacking a woman. It fitted in extremely well.
I have no doubt whatsoever that neither Michelle nor Lisa were involved in any way.
We believe the police got the right people, and they know they got the right people.
We were let down by the prosecution team, who failed to deliver.
The mistake that he made had very serious consequences.
Poor murderers walk free on the streets of London, getting on with their lives. And Alison is in a grave in Pilltown.
Alison Blackmore was born in London in 1969 and raised in the capital as part of a large Irish family. But for her and her younger brother Robert, it was their time in Pilltown, Southeast Ireland, that defined their childhood.
Growing up, we used to go to Ireland 3, maybe 4 times a year. Used to love going over there for 7, 8 weeks in the summer holidays. They were the really happy times when we'd be among our family in Ireland.
Alison used to stay with me and my parents, so it was like sleepovers, birthday parties, and then going into our teenage years, enjoying ourselves, having fun. Alison was a very beautiful person, not only on the outside, but also on the inside.
By October 1986, things seemed to be going well for Alison. She was just 16 and had begun work as a clerk at Barclays Bank when she met someone.
She had written to say that she had met this Irishman. His name was John, where he was from, and just her initial feelings, like, you know, dates and all the rest, and how she had liked him, and she felt that there could be more to it.
John Shaughnessy was 26 and had recently moved to London from Ireland. He'd started work as a porter at the Churchill Clinic, a private hospital in South London, and lived in staff accommodation there.
You didn't have to speak to Alison about what she thought. You knew when she was speaking about him, like, John is doing this, John is doing that. You just knew by her face how much she loved John. Equally as much, John loved her.
John was only ever a perfect gentleman in our home. There wasn't anything really we could pinpoint and say, we don't like John. Probably the only thing was this part of always being together. I just felt slightly unhealthy. I did feel their relationship was a little bit too intense, too enclosed.
Alison was 19 when the couple became engaged in the spring of 1989.
When they got engaged, I remember saying to Alison, you really haven't been out with any other bloke as such. Like, are you sure that John is the one? And she said, Mum, yes, I am. I'm sure nobody else. She didn't want to go out or meet anybody else. It was only John.
She just got her teeth into the wedding plans and really made sure that everything was perfect. He was getting involved in the preparation to the wedding just as much as what Alison was. He wasn't the kind of person who'd sit back and just let the wife-to-be get involved in it. He would turn around, he'd get involved as well. So to me, he seemed as though he was looking forward to it just as much.
The 23rd of June 1990 was the date set for John and Alison's wedding in Pilltown.
It was the day she'd been waiting for. She was gorgeous, she was beautiful. That morning when she was getting ready and she'd put her dress on and noticed on the bodice there was a slight tear. And said, oh, Alice, there's a tear in that. Doesn't matter, it doesn't make any difference, she said. She was getting married, and that was it.
It was a big day in Pilltown. It was a big day for our family, as I'm supposing that it was for John and his family also. It was an absolutely brilliant day.
Family members came from all parts of the country to witness the happy event. John and Alison also invited friends from work.
Well, this day means to me that I've got such a wonderful, beautiful bride, haven't I? I think it means an awful lot to me.
If you say so.
Yes, definitely. Well, I mean, it was well worth waiting for, wasn't it?
Those two people that were inseparable for the years they were together. No room for anybody else. You know, that this was the ultimate decision, what they were making, and they were going to be happy for evermore.
After the wedding, Alison continued working at the bank and John at the Churchill Clinic. He formed a close friendship with a colleague, Michelle Taylor. She worked in the accounts department and lived in staff accommodation. Her younger sister, Lisa, often came to stay.
There were several occasions when I met Michelle, and even though I wasn't that old at the time, I thought it very strange that there wasn't even a hello to myself if I was in John's company. It was always straight over to John, talk to John, and then leave.
Michelle just happened to always have been there. And I thought, well, this is happening quite a lot, but maybe there's nothing to it. Alison reassured me that, yes, she was always there. It was irrelevant how she felt about Michelle, but respected the fact that Michelle was a work colleague of John, as she knew it at that time.
There was only one time before they got married when I was staying at John's, when it was late at night, about 1 o'clock, and there was a knock on the door, and it was Michelle at the time. And that was the only time when I started questioning what's she doing knocking at 12 o'clock at night.
In January 1991, John and Alison moved to Vardens Road in Battersea.
They'd moved into a house which I believe used to be John's aunt's house. I thought that everything was okay. They were just biding their time, then looking to maybe move back to Ireland. I thought everything, I wouldn't say perfect, because I don't think anything's perfect, but I think everything was going okay. I didn't see any problems.
On Monday, the 3rd of June 1991, Alison finished work as usual at 5 o'clock and made her way home to Vardens Road.
She said, now, Anne-Marie, she said, I've been to my line manager and I've asked him about the new maternity leave scheme. I said, are you really seriously thinking about starting a family this soon, Alison? She said, yes.
She wanted to start a family, get a house in Ireland. That was the plan. Yeah.
She always said she wanted her children to have Irish accents. And that was it. You know, that was her goal in life.
Later that evening, after work, John was given a lift home from the Churchill Clinic by his friend, Michelle Taylor. As they entered the flat, they found Alison lying in a pool of blood at the top of the stairs. She was dead. She'd been stabbed 54 times.
For decades, our children have been safely protected against childhood diseases thanks to immunisation. That's why these diseases are now rarely seen, which is something we can all feel good about. For more information, contact your health visitor, GP or local surgery.
Dispatch managers, they're the synchronized people. They know an early morning delivery is guaranteed. They can track their packages like air traffic controllers. They can tell you precisely when customs are cleared. Even predict what's arriving next morning and when. Dispatch managers, synchronized people. UPS, synchronized shipping.
Ford Fiesta dreams of showing you what it's made of.
Having an unlucky day? Well, it doesn't matter with Daily Play, this new draw from the National Lottery, because even if you don't match any numbers whatsoever, you get another go for free.
The new Daily Play draw. Match no numbers, get a free go.
Season onion. Yeah, let's get him. You gotta let it go. Come to me, come to me. What you want, what you feel, what you get, what is real.
Special promotions available at Sainsbury's now.
The high-speed world of AOL broadband is now better value than ever. There are no setup costs, it's easy to connect, and now you don't even pay for the modem. You get all the excitement and entertainment of AOL broadband, all for one low monthly price of $27.99. There's never been a better time to experience AOL broadband, so for your free modem offer, call now on 08000 83 82 81. AOL. What happens is in your hands.
Quick, we've got towards these bins. So we can get to the giant kingdom. Come on, before he wakes up. Wow! Let's get the treasure before he climbs down. Oh no, he's coming to get us.
Oi, you mucky pops. That's not giant's blood on there, is it?
New Persil with fizz now cleans better than before on every stain imaginable.
3, 2, 1. James Bond. James Bond.
Beg your pardon? Ready to save the world again? Tuesday at 9.
Bond. James Bond.
Alison Shaughnessy's body was discovered at 8:30 p.m. on the 3rd of June 1991 by her husband and Michelle Taylor. Later that night, the police contacted her parents.
I went down the stairs and I knew there was something wrong when I saw, the policeman and 2 police women, because that would be a normal sort of thing that they do if they were bringing sort of bad news to you,
I think more or less directly when that Bob walked into the room and they said, "It's your daughter, Alison. She's been found dead in her flat under suspicious circumstances." And Bob came in and we just cried. And I said, "Look, you must be making a mistake. There's a wedding photograph on the sideboard. She's only married 11 months.
All I remember was John's devastation and that he didn't speak at all. He couldn't. He literally, physically couldn't speak. And he constantly had his head down and constantly crying.
John was in bits. John was in absolute bits when he was brought in. Didn't say a lot because he couldn't really speak a lot.
The police investigation had begun. It was immediately clear Alison had been the victim of a frenzied attack.
Going upstairs on a landing was Alison, fully clothed, lying on her front with one hand up, and I could see stab wounds on the hands and I think on the legs. She would have died very quickly indeed. There were 3 significant wounds which went to any depth, and a lot of the others were pinpricks. These wounds were unnecessary, they were futile. So this struck me as a question of rage. This was somebody venting strong emotions which had been bottled up for a long time.
A woman found stabbed at her home in South London has been identified as 21.
Post-mortem examination on a woman found dead at her home in
Her husband is
South
expected to attend a press conference later this week. Police are appealing for witnesses.
It was a really big story. She had 54 stab wounds. It was a gruesome murder. There appeared to be no real motive. It was a bizarre case. Why would a young girl, prime of her life, be murdered?
On the day of the murder, Alison arrived home at approximately 5:37. Police believe she was killed minutes after entering the flat, but there was no sign of a break-in, and Alison had taken time to pick up the post, suggesting to police she was comfortable with who she was with, that Alison may have known her attacker.
As an investigator, you would use the victim's body as the centerpiece, and then inquiries going out in a ripple effect, picking up family members, picking up associates, friends, and then contacts, and then somewhere in that you would actually find the person, in most cases, who's committed the murder.
7 days after Alison's death, there was an emotional press conference.
She would not hurt nobody or argue with anyone. She didn't deserve anything like this.
With a cast-iron alibi, John was quickly ruled out of the inquiry, but he was about to provide police with their prime suspect. Aside from his job as a porter, John Shaughnessy made extra money by making flower arrangements for the patients, a job he did with his friend, Michelle Taylor. But it quickly became apparent John and Michelle were more than just good friends.
One of the detectives early on had gone down to the Churchill Clinic and had made inquiries among all the staff, and it was quickly established that John and Michelle Taylor were having an affair.
I just could not believe that John would have done something like that to Alison.
I was stunned. Stunned, but not surprised.
I didn't go hysterical saying, no, it couldn't be. I was like, I don't know, I think we were all relatively calm in the fact that it came as no surprise to us.
The full extent of John Shaughnessy's betrayal was soon revealed.
It was a very intense affair as far as Michelle was concerned. This was somebody she loved, and I think she thought this was going to be a long-term affair.
John even invited Michelle to the wedding, spending the night before his marriage to Alison with her.
I think he still loved Alison, and as far as he was concerned in his own mind, he was always going to stay with Alison. He was having his cake and eat it.
The wedding video captured Michelle kissing both Alison and John on the steps of the church. Alison was seemingly unaware of the affair.
Alison didn't hate anybody, but I do have to tell you that she strongly disliked Michelle Taylor.
On the 24th of July, police searched Michelle's room at the Churchill Clinic.
There, amongst her belongings, they found this diary on which she had put her daily thoughts about John, about her relationship with him, and then her feelings towards Alison. And a famous bit there, as far as I'm concerned, is my dream solution would be for Alison to disappear as if she never existed. Which would give you a motive as far as I was concerned.
When John and Michelle had gone back to the flat and found Alison dead, Michelle had picked up the body, negating any forensic evidence linking her to the crime. None of her 3 police statements mentioned the affair with John. Lisa, in her statement, told police she didn't really know John or Alison and had certainly never been to their flat. But the day after the murder, a fingerprint expert found 2 prints belonging to Lisa on the inside of the front door.
The fingerprint team obviously thought they were just merely eliminating a set of prints, but we knew more than that, because as far as Lisa was concerned, Michelle was concerned, John was concerned, and Lisa's mother was concerned, she'd never been to the place. So the finding of the finger marks on the back of the door was really game, set and match for me. In my mind, and in the mind of everybody on the team, these were our prime suspects.
Officers went back to Vardens Road to conduct further house-to-house inquiries. A witness was seen who became crucial to the investigation.
A very experienced DC met Dr. Answorth White. Originally, he had been seen 8 weeks beforehand, and when he was asked previously, had he seen anything suspicious, of course he said no. When asked what he did see, he said, I recall seeing 2 young girls coming out of 41 Vardens Road, and obviously the team then started to get quite excited.
The doctor's sighting was vital. It was the only evidence that placed 2 girls in Vardens Road at 5:45, the time police believed Alison was murdered. But Michelle and Lisa had an alibi in their close friend from work, Jeanette Tapp. She told police she'd been with the 2 girls in her room in the staff quarters of the Churchill Clinic from 5:15 onwards.
Michelle and Lisa said that they were watching Neighbours at 5:30 with Jeanette Tapp. So therefore, if Alison died at 5:45 p.m, then that couldn't have been them. Obviously, she was giving a false alibi, but we had to prove that.
In the early hours of Wednesday, the 7th of August, 1991, 2 months after Alison's death, police arrested Michelle, Lisa, and their friend Jeanette Tapp.
You've been arrested for the murder of Alison Shaughnessy on the 3rd of June this year at Alison's flat at 41 Vardens Road, Battersea. Do you understand what I've just said to you?
In the initial stages of the interview, Michelle was very much in control, very much aware of what she was saying. She did not have a problem telling me about her relationship with John, her association with Alison, her knowledge of Alison, her association with John and Alison together. Any little bit of information outside the scope and the nitty-gritty of that murder time was not a problem.
After a couple of months of knowing John and being with John and going out with him and considering each other as proper boyfriend and girlfriend, I did love him.
How often did you see him?
In the beginning of the relationship would be most nights.
How did he feel about you?
He loved me.
And how did you feel knowing that there was this other woman in the background?
When you see a person and you don't see the other person with them, it doesn't really enter your head, so you still feel like you're boyfriend and girlfriend and there's no one else there.
She's just totally besotted about him. Totally. She would have done anything to have him. But I don't think she was willing to admit that she felt that she'd been badly treated by him, and I think she clung on to that hope that maybe there was a possibility of a relationship there somewhere.
In a different police station, Jeanette Tapp was questioned about the day of the murder. She'd already given 2 statements saying that she'd been with Michelle and Lisa from 5:15 onwards. In her police interview, she told a very different story.
Whilst we were conducting the search of your room this morning, you mentioned that you'd not told us the truth initially about the presence of Lisa and Michelle Taylor being with you on the 3rd of June. Now, can we just ask you to explain in somewhat more detail what you meant?
I was in fact out shopping and then round my mum's. When I got home to my room, Lisa was waiting for me on my balcony, waving to me. When I got upstairs, he said, me and Misha have been here since just after 5. Waiting for you. Misha's gone to work to do the flowers of John. And I believed them. I thought they'd been there.
Michelle and Lisa's alibi had been blown apart. The police asked Jeanette why she'd lied in her previous statements.
I didn't really think it would make any difference because I thought she was telling me the truth. I thought, well, she said she's telling me the truth that she was there. Then I said, I'll live her. Because I really thought she was telling me the truth.
Yeah, but unless somebody's asked you to say that, why did it occur to you to automatically lie about 5:15 unless somebody's asked you to lie?
Michelle said she didn't kill her. I didn't want her to go to prison. Somebody said she never done.
In her police interview, Lisa answered no comment to every question.
After 2 hours, we had a team meeting, find out what they'd discovered. Trevor Hurd came back and said, look, Jeanette has broken down. Jeanette had done this turnaround. Went back to interview the girls again. My understanding is the two lawyers got together and then it was declared between them, say nothing.
I do not wish to answer any more questions. I have already been interviewed by police officers 3 times prior to today and by yourselves for 2 hours this morning. There is nothing further that I can add. I have told you everything I know about this, and what I have told you is the truth.
I don't care what anybody says. If I'm going to accuse you of murder, you're going to scream from the top building in the capital to say, look, I am not guilty. Not only am I not guilty, these are the reasons why I'm not guilty. You're not going to sit there and say nothing.
You murdered Alison Shaughnessy. That is the truth.
No comment.
And how you can sit there and say no comment to something as serious as this is just beyond me. You had 1 ounce of remorse in your body. You tell me the truth.
No comment.
She had switched herself off completely. It's very frustrating, but there's nothing you can do about it. It's their right. They don't have to prove anything. They don't have to prove that they're innocent. It's our job to get the evidence, and it's our job to put the evidence before the court.
The police were convinced they'd found Alison's killers and knew how the sisters had carried out the crime.
I believe they left the Churchill Clinic at 4 o'clock. I think they then drove to Vardens Road, where they waited. Didn't quite know what time she would get home. Just as she's walking up Vardens Road, she would be met by these two, bouncing along, saying, we've come to collect something for John. Her, in her own naive little way, and why shouldn't she? Just let these two in, she unlocks the door, she picks up her mail, so she's comfortable with who she's with. Undoes her own personal flat, up the stairs, just as she's got to the very top, she's then attacked. They then run out. They're then clearly seen by Dr. Unsworth White that day. Race round to the car. We've put it down as a 10 or 11 minute journey back to the Churchill Clinic, and then they're sighted around about the 6 o'clock mark. Everything actually fitted as far as I was concerned. She killed Alison because John had intimated that he was going to go back to Ireland with Alison because they were going to start a family, and I think Michelle then thought, look, I'm going to lose this guy. And I think that's when the seeds of murder actually were born.
Febreze for your mattress and duvet? That's a fresh idea.
I'm not vain, just beautiful. Magnum Vanity, limited edition white chocolate and champagne ripple. The last of the Magnum 7 Deadly Sins from Wolves.
It's dolphin time! Off you go! Off you go!
Fine.
Humans sometimes like just to sit and do nothing. But that's not always the best policy. Because if you dig out your tax return and send it to the Inland Revenue by September the 30th, they'll work out the tax calculation for you. So then you can do something a little more exciting.
Self-assessment. Tax doesn't have to be taxing.
Get the music you want on AOL Broadband. Bands, concerts, exclusive performances, and the latest downloads all included, and all at broadband speed. And you get everything you want for only $27.99 a month. AOL. What happens is in your hands.
Asda would like to thank the thousands of people who have helped roll back thousands of prices, which has resulted in Asda being voted the lowest priced supermarket for the 6th year running. So, everyone's happy. Always rolling back prices. That's Asda people.
The murder trial begins today at the Old Bailey. Two sisters from South London, Michelle Taylor, aged 21, and Lisa Taylor, aged 19, are alleged to have killed Alison Shaughnessy at her home in Battersea in June 1991. The trial is expected to last for 3 weeks.
Two young girls accused of murder took this story into the stratosphere. You know, it was very, very unusual, very, very rare, and it made it a sensational story.
We all were very concerned at the sensational way in which the case was reported. The press took an interest in this case that was above and beyond anything which any of us had ever experienced before.
People want to know everything about it. People wanted to follow the case, I mean, every day. I mean, it was just a fantastic interest in knowing who these people were and how it reached such a stage where Alison died in this frenzied attack.
The evidence against the Taylor sisters was almost entirely circumstantial. The prosecution counsel had an uphill task convincing the jury that the two young girls in the dock were the murderers.
Well, I think the strongest point was the evidence from Miss J.J. Tapp. It was effectively the creation of an alibi.
The jury was reminded Jeanette Tapp originally told police that on the day of the murder she'd been with Michelle and Lisa watching TV and playing Monopoly in the Churchill Clinic from 5:15 onwards. The pathologist put the time of Alison's death at approximately 5:45, meaning the sisters couldn't possibly have carried out the murder. However, when arrested, Jeanette quickly changed her story, telling police she hadn't got back to the clinic until 7:15. Michelle and Lisa then told her they'd been waiting since 5:15.
If in fact the girls were seeking to establish an alibi for themselves, they were doing it at a moment in time before the body had been discovered and before the time of the murder was known. Now, who but the murderers could have created an alibi for themselves so early?
We had the suggestion that she was not being completely truthful about everything. And I mean, obviously we've been very helpful if she had been able to provide an alibi, but she wasn't and she didn't. And we had to go back then to, if you like, back to the starting point and look at the case again.
The next piece of evidence focused on whether or not Lisa was party to Alison's murder. She told police that she'd never been to Vardens Road. However, her fingerprints were found on the inside of the door.
Mr. Eric Milne, the fingerprint officer, was prepared unusually in this case to express as an opinion that the fingerprint of Lisa which was found on the door of the flat, was up to 72 hours old. Now, there was no circumstance in which Lisa's print could have arrived on that door unless she had been party to the stabbing of Alison.
In court, Lisa exercised her right to silence. Michelle gave an explanation for the fingerprints.
What she suggested was that they had been round to the flat 2 to 3 weeks before to clean the windows, and that Lisa's print had got onto the door at that time.
We don't normally give evidence of age, but I was so convinced that the marks were not as old as the defense would have that I was prepared to actually give my opinion that, again, in my opinion, those were not that old.
You cannot date a fingerprint. Fingerprint could be there for hours, could be there for days, could be there for weeks. And once you had an explanation, and we were able to go up with an explanation as to why she might have been there, that in itself was sufficient, at least to raise a doubt as to where the fingerprint would take you.
If the fingerprint officer was correct, then that was a powerful piece of evidence to demonstrate that Michelle had been present. Well, we knew that. Michelle was uncontrovertibly present on the 3rd. But if Lisa had been present, then that assisted to establish the very real likelihood that those 2 girls had been the 2 murderers.
The prosecution suggested Michelle's motive for murder was clearly laid out in her diary, where she'd written, "My dream solution would be for Alison to disappear so that I could give everything to the man I love."
People write all sorts of things in a diary, and quite often what they write in the diary is the sort of thing that may have a large element of fantasy involved in it. I don't think anybody would like to be held responsible for every entry in their diary. It doesn't necessarily follow. If you put in your diary, it's a motive for murder.
The last diary entry was in November 1990, 6 months before Alison's death. The crucial question was, did Michelle still have feelings for John at the time of the murder, or was the affair over? In court, Michelle said the relationship had ended, but John told police the last time they'd had sex was on the 13th of May, just 3 weeks before Alison's murder.
There was some pointers to the fact that Michelle at that stage was in some state of desperation about her relationship with Shaughnessy. He'd recently moved into Vardens Road with Alison. He was talking about having a child with Alison, if my memory serves me, and he was talking about going to Ireland with Alison. And all those things, the Crown suggested, crystallized in Michelle's mind that she had a short time left to ensure that Shaughnessy became her husband.
The papers hung on every word the prosecution said. Headline after headline described Michelle as the jealous lover wanting Alison out of the way. Little room was left for the sisters' innocence.
The press coverage was inordinate, inaccurate and hysterical throughout. It was absolutely entirely out of order. Cases should not be publicised in this way.
I didn't think the publicity was that bad. It was the perfect tabloid story. You know, sex, love, it had everything and ended in murder, so it caught the public's fascination.
The Sun newspaper froze a frame from John and Alison's wedding video so that Michelle's peck on John's cheek looked like a mouth-to-mouth kiss.
The media had tried and convicted the girls beforehand. It was mega. But bear in mind, you're dealing here with a case with, what, 1992? And we weren't really used to that degree of coverage at that time. And it was spectacular coverage, it was lurid, it was vivid, and unfortunately for any potential juror, he or she might have read an element of truth into it.
One of the last pieces of evidence the jury heard was that of Dr. Unsworth White, the surgeon who'd cycled past John and Alison's flat on the day of the murder and seen 2 girls coming down the steps.
His evidence did not by itself point inevitably to the guilt of the 2 sisters. What could be said with confidence was that if his evidence was accepted, it was consistent with some of the other evidence which also pointed to young females as having committed this murder, and if two young females, then who else other than the two defendants?
If the prosecution was right, how had Michelle and Lisa managed to commit the crime in such a short space of time? The earliest Alison could have arrived home was 5:37, leaving just 23 minutes for the sisters to get into the flat, kill Alison, get back into the car, and drive the 4 miles in rush hour traffic back to the Churchill Clinic, where there was an undisputed sighting of them at 6 o'clock.
There was no doubt that the timing was extremely tight. It's possible. Certainly it's possible. But it's a very tight time frame.
The prosecution will concoct a case saying, well, yes, there was enough time for all this to have happened and for somebody to have committed a crime and fled the scene of the crime. Normally those cases turn out to be miscarriages of justice because people don't behave like that in real life situations.
After 3 weeks, the trial came to a close.
It really wasn't a substantial case. It was too dependent upon circumstantial evidence, timings in some cases, and too dependent on motive.
There was, to my mind, no doubt that if the jury fitted the jigsaw together in the way that I suggested, that the jigsaw justified the conclusion of guilt.
After 5.5 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a unanimous verdict: guilty of murder.
I watched them and watched their reaction when the guilty plea came in, and the look on their faces, to me, I expected them to shout out saying, yes, we did do it and we're not a bit sorry. That was just the look I could take from their faces. But Michelle Taylor just calmly, in one eye, just looked to the corner where John would normally be sitting, but they were very composed.
The Taylor sisters were driven away to begin their life sentences.
I was very depressed because, apart from anything else, the thought of what the girls were going to have to endure thereafter by way of punishment for that particular type of crime meant that the punishment would be harsh in the extreme.
I rang up the QC and said, this is madness, isn't it? And he said, yes, it seems madness to me as well. I simply don't understand how the jury could have reached that decision because the evidence was very, very thin.
When it was all over, yeah, we were saddened. We were relieved, but we were sad for Alison because, said Ali, this was all about you and what happened to you, and you are now in a graveyard in Ireland.
We came for guilty, we got it. The sentence didn't matter. Nothing would ever atone for Alison's death. So, we got guilty and we're satisfied with that.
At the request of Alison's parents, John wasn't in court for the verdict, but he joined them after to give his reaction.
At the end of the day, all I can say is that Alison can now rest in peace now that we know that those two people have been sent to prison. And thank you, that's all I've got to say.
After the trial, John Shaughnessy moved back to Ireland.
Through association, he is responsible for Alison's death. If he didn't have the affair with Michelle Taylor, Alison would still be alive today.
The police were in no doubt about the jury's decision.
Absolutely delighted. Two evil women, two evil young girls who have callously killed a fine lady have been found guilty, and justice has been seen to be completed. Mr. and Mrs. Blackmore were obviously delighted to see the people who had killed Alison had sort of got their just desserts. The whole system was absolutely elated and sort of says, like, you know, brilliant work, well done, and as a team we were highly congratulated, and everybody thought we walked on water. A year later, the boat went out and it sank.
Time to try the new Cif Cream, our best ever tough cleaning formula. New Cif Cream.
Bev!
Kev! Bev!
Kev? Bev? Kev?
Bev! Kev!
With an AA car loan, the typical rate is just 6.9%. So you might surprise yourself with what you can afford.
Nice car.
Thanks! We used to have one of those.
To get more car for your money, just ask on 0800 374 999. Call now, and you could also get a free AA car inspection.
Still the machine rumbles on and on. I lie here tormented by my enemies. On your feet, they scream. On your feet. The deadly cries hound me from my sleep. And now they scrub away my time. Welcome to Stalag 39.
The Taylor sisters were jailed for life in 1992. As memories of the trial faded, a number of journalists embarked on a campaign to prove the Taylor sisters had been the victims of a miscarriage of justice.
I think you can dismantle the case and look at every aspect of it. You look at evidence, motive, opportunity, personality, character. You can look at all those factors, and in no way at all Michelle and Lisa going to be reasonable suspects for this crime.
I had a feeling that there was something just not right about the way the evidence had come out. I couldn't put my finger on it, I couldn't articulate it, but I had just a feeling that from a prosecution point of view, it was all just too pat, too smug, it all fitted together just that bit too much.
There simply isn't any case on record of two young girls having behaved in this way.
Michelle and Lisa Taylor, the two sisters jailed for the murder of Alison Shaughnessy, have won the right to an appeal. Defence lawyers will argue that they did not receive a fair trial due to prejudicial media coverage. The appeal date has been set.
Michelle and Lisa's parents set up a campaign headquarters at their home in Forest Hill to free the Taylor too.
I believe the girls were convicted on their morals, especially when we had members of the jury walking in with newspapers under their arms. They must have read these articles on the way up to the court.
As part of the appeal process, the police were asked to hand over all the original paperwork from the murder inquiry to the defense team. An important discovery was made.
I was told that they had found a document which revealed that Dr. Unsworth White's initial impression of the two girls was inconsistent with the evidence that he gave at the trial.
Notes taken by a police officer who spoke to the doctor on Sunday the 4th of August 1991 were problematic. Two things in particular stood out. One was the doctor said the two girls he'd seen had walked up the road. The other was he commented that one of the girls may have been black. The day after, another officer returned to take a formal statement from the doctor, who then described the girls as running up the road and that both were white. There was a significant change in the doctor's story.
I was absolutely horrified. The identification or alleged identification of two girls at the scene was central to this case, and therefore anything which impinged upon the accuracy of the evidence regarding that was absolutely fundamental to this case.
We went to a council conference 2 days beforehand. Mr. Nutting said, "Mr. Burke, I would like you to come to the Old Bailey to see me to explain why you've deliberately withheld documents from me."
He indicated to me that he had decided that it was not necessary to disclose it because the description which Dr. Unsworth White had given on the 4th of August had not been put into statement form. Well, that was an unhappy approach to the responsibility of disclosure, because the idea that disclosure depends on the nature of the document on which the information is recorded rather than the quality of the information itself is self-evidently absurd.
This was just a piece of paper which generated an action, and it was investigated and explored by a detective to find out what this man did or did not see. Dr. Unsworth White wrote a statement to say both girls were definitely white.
If the jury had known that, and the defense had been able to deploy the information and the material, Dr. Unsworth White may well have cut a very different figure from the figure that he was able to present at the first trial.
The night before the appeal, police paid a visit to Alison's parents.
Chris Burke said, "Breather, by the way, they're going to walk tomorrow." I said, "Hang on, what are you talking about?" So he showed me, it wasn't a statement, it was just a copy of a jotting from a book where Dr. Unsworth White had said he saw 2 girls, 1 black, but retracted, which is on this piece of paper in brackets, both white. I read it, I just thought, as if they are going to get out on this little piece of paper.
On the day of the appeal, the media were camped outside the courts. Inside, friends and family of the Taylor sisters sat waiting.
John Nutting got up and basically threw his towel in. And I thought, wow, I've seen many things in a courtroom, but never have I seen the Crown case fold so quickly. It was astonishing, absolutely astonishing.
It seemed to me to be unarguable that the defense were entitled to the information contained within that document.
He stood up and just capitulated and said, "Look, we have no answers to this," and expressed that Detective Superintendent Burke wishes to express how sorry he is, which I was absolutely gobsmacked about.
I can well understand the superintendent being very sore about the whole thing. We all make mistakes. We all make mistakes. The tragedy in this case was that the mistake he made had a dreadful consequence.
The judges were as damning about the media coverage of the first trial as they were about the police's failure to disclose evidence. They described it as unremitting, extensive, sensational, inaccurate, and misleading, heavily criticizing the still picture taken from John and Alison's wedding video.
The unfair media coverage meant that they couldn't get a fair trial in the first place. And of course, the time you got to the appeal, any prospect of a fair trial second time round the prospect was nil.
We left the appeal courts and got bus back to North London before the judges came back and gave their ruling. As we came back to our friend's house, the Taylors were on the steps of the appeal court.
Michelle and Lisa Taylor, flanked by their family, free to go home, their convictions quashed. The judges condemned the press for prejudicial reporting of the original trial and the police for concealing vital evidence. Michelle, shaking with nervousness, read a statement.
We have spent 2 years of our lives protesting our innocence, and only now has the deliberate mistake of the police come to light. We will not say by being released justice has been done, because we should not have been put in this position in the first place. We also want to thank our legal team for believing us and working so hard to prove our innocence.
I was just vastly relieved. Because I thought the girls were innocent. I think what happened was that people worked from what they perceived to be a motive, and then they worked backwards. In other words, they said, these are the girls, they did it, and then they fitted the rest of the evidence into accord with their theory.
During trial, I remember coming back and seeing mainly the clip of the video that was in the press, the photo that was taken. I remember looking at it and thinking, how could they do that? How could they make it into something it isn't?
Thankfully, this is one case which is not a miscarriage of justice, because the wrong people were prosecuted and were convicted, and now their convictions have been quashed. So that is a satisfactory resolution of the case, because the Taylor sisters are no longer deemed guilty of this murder.
After the appeal, Alison's parents left the capital to begin a new life in Ireland. They've never wavered from their belief that the Taylor sisters are guilty, that the two people they held responsible for ending their daughter's life walked free. It's a bitter pill to swallow.
It was just like being in a black hole. There was nowhere to go. The appeal courts might have just have said to Bobby and me, this is the way it is, just get on with your lives. Forget about what happened. And really, that's what they were saying to us. There's nowhere else you can go. There's no avenues. And that's justice. No, it's not. A second injustice was done to Alison. And we can't do anything about it.
Alison's headstone stands in the graveyard of the church in which she married John Shaughnessy. She was buried 3 days before her first wedding anniversary.
We miss her terribly, and we'll always miss her. All the family and her friends. They're all so saddened every time they talk of Alison. It was just so sad, all taken away from her. And thankfully, she won't be forgotten.